The Hundred Years' War. The Hundred Years' War, 1337–1453, was one of the longest and most brutal conflicts in European history, lasting 116 years. It was fought between the kingdoms of England and France, two of the most powerful nations in medieval Europe, and it left deep scars on both countries. The war wasn't just about military battles. It involved politics, economics, and the very identity of each nation. Although it began as a dispute over territory and royal succession, it quickly spiraled into a prolonged struggle that reshaped the map of Europe and left a legacy of bloodshed and bitterness. The roots of the Hundred Years' War go back long before 1337 to the Norman conquest of England in 1066. When William the Conqueror, a French nobleman from Normandy, took the English throne, he became both the King of England and a vassal of the French king because he held land in France. This dual role was complicated and led to generations of tension as English kings became powerful enough to challenge French authority. But the immediate cause of the Hundred Years' War was a crisis over who should sit on the throne of France. In 1328, the French king Charles IV died without a male heir, leaving the throne up for grabs. The French nobles quickly passed a law known as the Salic Law, which prevented women from inheriting the throne or passing it on to their sons. They used this law to deny the claim of Edward III of England, who was the son of Charles IV's sister, and thus had a legitimate claim through her. Instead, they crowned Philip VI, a cousin of Charles, as king. But Edward III was not willing to give up his claim to the French throne, and this dispute over succession set the stage for war. The initial phase of the war was marked by decisive English victories thanks in large part to superior military tactics and technology. English forces relied heavily on longbowmen, archers who wielded a powerful longbow capable of shooting arrows with deadly force. At battles like Crécy, 1346, and Poitiers, 1356, the English longbowmen decimated the French knights, who were unable to break through the English lines. The Battle of Poitiers was especially disastrous for France, as King John II of France was captured, leaving the French kingdom leaderless and demoralized. Adding to the misery of the French people, the Black Death swept through Europe in the 1340s, killing a significant portion of the population. The plague did not end the fighting. Instead, it made the suffering worse as both England and France struggled with shrinking armies, economic hardship, and social chaos. This period of the war came to an end with the Treaty of Bretigny in 1360, which granted England large territories in France, including the Duchy of Aquitaine in exchange for Edward III giving up his claim to the French throne. But peace would not last. The Treaty of Bretigny proved to be little more than a temporary truce. War resumed in 1369, as the French king Charles V began a campaign to reclaim lost territories. Charles and his commander Bertrand du Guesclin used a strategy of guerrilla warfare, avoiding large battles and instead focusing on hit-and-run tactics that wore down the English forces. This strategy proved effective, and by 1380, France had reclaimed much of the territory it had lost earlier. However, both countries were plagued by internal conflicts that would weaken their ability to fight. In England, political factions quarreled over control of the government, especially during the minority of Richard II. In France, the situation was even worse. King Charles VI suffered from severe mental illness, leading to a power struggle among French nobles. This division in France would soon be exploited by the English. In 1415, Henry V of England launched a new campaign in France, determined to reclaim the English position of dominance. He landed with an army in northern France and achieved a stunning victory at the Battle of Agincourt. The French army, filled with heavily armored knights, suffered devastating losses. English longbowmen once again decimated the French forces, leaving a trail of dead that included many of France's nobility. The Agincourt victory was a shocking blow to the French morale, and it seemed that England might finally achieve victory. Henry V's ambition didn't stop at military conquest. He sought to secure the French throne for himself. In 1420, he signed the Treaty of Troyes with the French king Charles VI, who was mentally unwell and unable to effectively rule. According to this treaty, Henry would marry Charles's daughter, Catherine of Valois, and their future children would inherit both the English and French thrones. In effect, The treaty disinherited Charles VI's son, the Dauphin Charles, later Charles VII, and made Henry the heir to France. By the late 1420s, English forces controlled much of northern France, including the city of Orléans, a critical stronghold for the French. It was at this dark moment that an unlikely figure emerged to change the course of the war: Joan of Arc. Joan was a young peasant girl who claimed to hear voices from saints instructing her to support Charles VII and drive the English out of France. In 1429, Joan persuaded Charles VII to let her lead an army to lift the siege of Orléans. Against all odds, her leadership inspired the French troops, and they achieved a miraculous victory. The English were forced to retreat, and Joan continued her campaign, winning several other victories and leading Charles VII to Reims, where he was crowned King of France. Joan's success marked a turning point in the war. Her charisma and faith rallied the French people, transforming a demoralized nation into a force ready to reclaim its land. But Joan's rise to prominence made her a target. In 1430, she was captured by the Burgundians, French allies of England, and handed over to the English. In a sham trial, she was accused of heresy and burned at the stake in 1431. Though her death was brutal, Joan's impact was undeniable, and she became a symbol of French resistance and heroism. After Joan's death, the French continued to rally. Charles VII reorganized the French army, introducing new tactics and improving discipline. With the support of artillery, a relatively new technology, French forces began to dismantle English-held fortresses. Slowly but steadily, the French reclaimed their territory, and the English position weakened. In 1453, the French won a decisive victory at the Battle of Castillon, marking the end of the 100 Years' War. By this point, England had lost nearly all of its territory in France, retaining only the coastal city of Calais. The war was finally over, but it had lasting consequences. The 100 Years' War fostered a sense of national identity in both England and France. For the French, Joan of Arc became a symbol of courage and defiance. For the English, the war was a bitter defeat that would lead to internal strife, including the Wars of the Roses. The 100 Years' War left both nations scarred. The French countryside was devastated by pillaging and warfare, and entire villages were wiped off the map. Famine and disease were rampant, with many people left homeless and starving. In England, the economic strain of the war led to heavy taxation, causing resentment and rebellion among the population. But beyond the material destruction, the 100 Years' War changed the fabric of medieval society. The role of knights and chivalry, once seen as the pinnacle of medieval warfare, was undermined by the rise of new tactics and technology. The English longbowmen and French artillery had shown that ordinary soldiers could change the course of history, challenging the dominance of the noble class. In the end, the 100 Years' War was more than a fight over territory or succession. It was a brutal struggle that reshaped Europe, ending the medieval era and paving the way for the modern age. For those who lived through it, it was a time of darkness, suffering, and unimaginable endurance.